most of your for sale by owners in your community are doing so right now because they are underwater in their homes and don't know, frankly, what their options are. And now you could explain to them, literally knock on their door, call them, help them create a graceful exit from their underwater home, and tell them about HAFA. I mean, guys, if you're listening to this call, it sounds very technical. You know, Jeff and I are both about to start talking about something called a RAS, and he's talked about the SSA, you know, the short sale agreement, and all these terms. None of this stuff should intimidate you. This is all everything that we're talking about now is, frankly, very procedural. Follow the steps. And understand the process. What you need to be thinking about as we're going through this call and answering all of your questions, or as many as we can get to, is how can you apply this information to helping people in your community? All right, so what the heck is a RAS form?
Well, we skipped over a few key steps because the short sale agreement leads to the seller deciding whether to approve it. The broker, real estate broker, has to sign it and agree to its terms, send it back, then they market the property. Once they get an executed contract, that's when this RAS form comes into effect. RAS is a terrible acronym, but it stands for something that makes sense. Requests for Approval of Short Sale. So that homeowner with the realtor or real estate agent gets that executed contract with a RAS. They submit it to the servicer, and they have to send all the addenda, the contract, and some proof that the buyer, prospective buyer, has some financial strength in order to actually close the deal, and that goes into the servicer for review and, you hope, approval.
Okay, so that, again, Jeff's right. I didn't go over all the specifics of the procedures. It's just because the procedures, really what they are, is essentially what the same exact process as it is now, with a couple changes and with a couple different forms. Don't be intimidated by this. Frankly, I think for a lot of you, especially those of you who have been doing short sales for a long time at a high level, as I know a lot of you guys at Harris Real Estate University have been, you're going to see that following the HAFA guidelines is actually a streamlining in a lot of ways of the paperwork and the processes. So don't be intimidated by it. Just have an open mind. And like I said, keep focused on how you can use this information to help homeowners in your community. All right, so now this is something, Jeff, I know that you and I have talked about this a lot prior to this call. I've read a ton about this of just different realtors talking on, you know, all the active rain and the rest of it. So let's talk about the commission policy. I mean, there's been a lot of unnecessary confusion about the commissions handled under HAFA. It might be interesting if you feel comfortable talking about sort of the original HAFA guidelines and how they've changed and how there was, you know, some interesting little anecdotal things happening with realtors' commissions, if you feel that would be a valuable thing to talk about. But how are commissions?
Well, it might be valuable just because it explains that some of the things people are hearing might be relate to what the original November 30th announcement was, but then that changed on March 12th. And so that's the source of a lot of the confusion. So on November 30th, as far as commissions go, the proposal, although I don't think some Treasury staff knew what was in the guidelines, I should have said. One, it said in the short sale agreement, there's a blank there for commissions, and that amount is the amount in the listing agreement, but not more than 6%. Now that changed, so don't count on that. It also said something that sounds pretty good, but it said something horrible, which was the servicer can use an unspecified amount of the real estate commission to pay a negotiator hired by the servicer to quote help the real estate agent. Well, you know, we were on the phone right away, and it took months, but and we decided to work in sort of, you know, back channels, just in conversations with staff, and I was beginning to be a little nervous that we hadn't sent a big public letter to Secretary Geithner, but in the end it worked, and on March 12th they announced the policy change. No longer would the real estate commission be reduced and transferred over by the servicer to pay their negotiator. So that was a big success on March 12th. They did change something on commissions that a lot of people are unhappy about, and we know that. But there's a blank now for commissions, and the policy is the servicer identifies the customary and usual, reasonable and customary commission. I don't even know what the exact words are.
I read it too.
They come up with it. And so we went to Treasury and said, look, there is no such thing because there's competition on commissions and so forth. And they said, look, we never meant to cut out the servicer. Sometimes there may not be enough money in the deal for them to pay 6 and have it work. So if you take 5, It can be a short sale. If you do 6, it's a foreclosure. So, they made that point. They also made the point that this is information known up front. This is not a situation where you do all that work, like now, and then 2 days before the closing, they say, oh, you represent both sides? Well, I know your listing agreement says 6 or 5, but we're only going to give you 1.5. That's the latest story I heard. So, in many ways, it's better than the current situation. Plus, if they put in 3, you do not have to take 3. You can negotiate that. You can say, no, I will not do this for less than 5. I am skilled. I am an expert. I can get this job done. I can save you a lot of money, but I won't work for less than 5, and see what happens. It's a matter of negotiation.
Well, it's no different than the way commissions have been handled really since the beginning of time,
Okay.
I mean, you have to justify, you're going to have to sometime negotiate. Sometimes it's going to be an issue. Sometimes it's not going to be an issue. Those of you who've been in the industry for a long time, you know how to overcome commission objections. Jeff, I don't have any indication yet from any of our students if the lenders are going to be making this a major issue. I suspect they won't because they need us.
Too early to know, I think. Yep. They do need you, absolutely. Yeah,
the lenders basically are, if they don't have realtors working on their behalf, and they're in some serious trouble because it takes realtors out there to initiate these things. I mean, Jeff, what's the statistic, like the number on how much less a short sale is costing a lender versus a foreclosure? We were talking about that yesterday. It's staggering.
The numbers are staggering. On a typical house, it's going to be $50,000 to $100,000. Worse if the lender goes ahead with foreclosure. What often happens is it becomes vacant. Immediately the values in the neighborhood go down, which becomes a downward spiral. The property is just not going to be kept up. With a vacant property, the risk of vandalism is huge, as we all have heard the stories about stripped copper, stripped electrical, all of that. So when that happens, you could even have bigger losses.
Well, I know in Las Vegas, where Julie and I live, every weekend you look on Craigslist and you see a bunch of people that are having sort of garage sales at their soon-to-be vacant homes where they're selling out virtually everything that's sellable. So hopefully that type of thing is going to come to an end. And this is worth mentioning, Jeff, because I think you and National Association of Realtors, again, need recognition for this. The original HAFA agreement that you guys, that came out the 12th, or when we had it amended, who put that in there with regards to the realtors' commissions being, essentially reduced to pay for the bank's negotiators? Obviously, the banks put that in, right?
Well, I was not privy to the conversations between Treasury and the banks, but I'm sure that was a conversation between the announcement date of May 14th of the outline of the program and the details on November 30th. My assumption was Treasury was negotiating with the servicers to make this program one that the servicers and lenders could accept, and pretty clearly that's how that happened. But I don't know. I don't know it for a fact, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist.
It's safe to say. That's right.
Safe to say, yes. I could be wrong. Nobody sue me, but that's my guess.
That's right. But had it not been for the National Association of Realtors, intervening on that and protecting our commissions, guys, open up your eyes to the fact what the National Association of Realtors is doing for us in the industry. Obviously they're our association, but they are having to go to bat for us on more ways than we can possibly imagine, especially in this housing climate. So just keep that in mind next year when you pay your annual fees. All right, so let's see. Next question that we have is reasonable. Okay, we talked about that. I'm back to my questions. Julie, anything come to mind as I'm going through my questions?
A couple of people have asked if any of this affects the tax ramifications for their sellers.
Well, you know what, Julie? Let's get to that question in a second. I'm reading some an IM you just sent me, and you sent me a very interesting note here. You've heard that Bank of America, since we were sort of on the commissions thing here, has actually done something. Why don't you talk about that, Julie?
Yes. So, Jeff, this is Julie. Right out of the mouth of one of our graduate students who is doing a lot of short sales. She lives in Florida. And, of course, a lot of the condos that she is selling have had some really serious depreciation. We're talking about condos that used to be $200,000 are now selling for $35,000, $45,000. And so she heard on a call that we had on our blog that Bank of America will allow $3,000 minimum commissions. And she hasn't done a Bank of America deal yet, but she has successfully negotiated into one of these lesser expensive condos, a $3,000 commission with GMAC. She's currently working on one with Wells Fargo. What do you know about that in terms of minimum commissions on some of these really inexpensive properties? Is there any discussion about that from your end?
Well, this was news to me until this morning, and I think it's an encouraging sign. At the moment, it's not a half a short sale because they do have a 6% cap on the amount of that commission. So
right. So technically, that would break that.
So technically, it would break that.